Hey there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to paint these beautiful peaches in a bucket. Now today we're going to have a time lapse here on YouTube, but you can find the real-time version of this tutorial up in Critique Club. I will have a link in the video description so you can find it. Critique Club is a membership group that's $5 a month, and you get 2 brand new tutorials every month, as well as access to the archives, which has, I don't know, maybe 70 other long, real-time, more advanced tutorials than you'd find on YouTube, and you get a creative prompt every month, and what's more is you can share your artwork with me for personalized feedback. So check that out, Critique Club, $5 a month, and there'll be a link in the video description if you're interested. I'm sketching on my watercolor paper with a watercolor pencil. I'm actually using a couple colors here. I used gray to sketch in the picture, and I used kind of a peachy color, like a salmon pink kind of, to sketch in the peaches, and I'll use a kind of a very pale kind of sap green color to sketch in the leaves. What I want here is I want to be able to draw it dark enough for you to see it, but also I don't want my lines to really be visible when I'm done. Sometimes I like that look where all you see is the paint and there's no like discernible sketch lines. And sketching with a watercolor pencil is a great way to do that. You can use whatever brand of watercolor pencil you like for this type of technique, because it's just gonna just kind of wash away as you're painting. If you wanted your lines not to wash away, you could use a colored pencil, like an erasable colored pencil. That won't bead up when you put your watercolors over it. You could also use a graphite pencil and just kind of gently press an eraser over it, a kneaded eraser over it before you go to paint if you don't want the lines. So there's many different ways to get that effect. So just do what's easiest for you, whatever you have access to. One way I create unity in my paintings is by working wet into wet to begin for my first layer, or for at least my background. So what I'm doing here is I'm wetting every bit of my paper except for the peaches. Now you could wet the peaches too if you wanted to, but I really wanted to make sure that those yellowy peaches were nice and bright. Actually, they're nectarines, but I'm going to call them peaches the whole time because I just can't get the word nectarine in my brain, I guess. But I wanted them to be nice and vibrant, so I did not wet the nectarines. The water and paint is only going to go where the paper's wet, so I can go in and add as much paint as I want, and it's not going to touch those peaches or nectarines, whatever you like. And I thought it would be fun to use my M-Gram watercolors. I'm using some Raw Sienna, I'm using some Ultramarine blue, I'm going to use some burnt umber, and I'm also using a few of my Schmincke super granulating colors. So a friend of mine shared her stash of paint with me. She made me a little palette with these colors, so it was a lot of fun to experiment with them. I'm using the Galaxy Black for the gray tones there in the tin. Now honestly, you can mix burnt umber or burnt sienna with ultramarine blue and get a very similar color. In fact, this color is made by mixing Mars Black, PBK 11, also known as Lunar Black in Daniel Smith. It's mixing that color with ultramarine blue. That PBK 11 black is very granulating, and ultramarine blue is very granulating, so they just make a nice textured paint, which I thought would be great for a galvanized old bucket. But again, ultramarine blue will granulate and do its thing on its own. Mix it with some burnt sienna, and you'll get a very, very similar effect. I think these Schmincke paints are so fun, but I don't think they're necessary in your watercolor journey. Obviously, they're not necessary. They just came out a few months ago, or maybe a year ago. So, honestly, use what you have, and get to know your supplies, because the more you use them, the more you're going to be comfortable with them, and the better you'll do with them. I'm using Cad Yellow. Now, if you don't like to use cadmiums on your palette, you could use Gamboge or Indian Yellow. You just want a really nice, bright, warm red. I'm using some quinacridone red. Now, quinacridone red, this is PR209. It's got a little bit of an orangey undertone to it, but it's very transparent. Generally, when you have your warmer reds, they will be a little bit opaque, like your cadmium red. But the quinacridone colors are very transparent. So if you used a quinacridone red, a quinacridone coral, a quinacridone scarlet, you would get a little bit of a neutralized to warmer undertone, but still have that transparency that will give you gorgeous, luminous oranges and peaches. So a little tip there for you. Of course, you don't have to have the exact same red. Look at your palette, see what looks closest, and go for that. There was also I think it was Tundra Pink, that had a kind of a pretty maroonish color, and I thought some of that would look nice on the skin of the nectarines, and also around the peach pit area, or the nectarine pit area. I thought it would be kind of a good, that texture, the granulation would just help me get that appearance of that gritty, textured indentation where the pit was on one of the sliced nectarines. I'm using Hooker's Green for the leaves. Now I generally like to use sap green, but I felt like I needed a little bit darker of a green that wasn't quite as saturated. So I'm using Hooker's Green, and this is an M gram. Of course, depending on the brand of paint you use, a sap green and Hooker's Green and olive green can all be different. Like for instance, I love Sennelier's olive green, but I love M gram sap green. I prefer the olive green and Winsor & Newton to their sap green. You know, it just depends. Everyone's formulation and proportions are just a little bit different. But anyway, I wanted a little bit of a darker green, and then I mixed some of that with my Cad Yellow anytime I wanted to lighten it up. Now, doing a cadmium yellow, which is a slightly opaque watercolor, cadmium colors tend to be opaque, that's going to dull the color down a little bit. It's going to dull that green. So it's going to make the leaves the supporting actors in this production. They're not going to be the star of the show. That's for the Nectarines to be. Another reason I wanted to use that cadmium yellow is because I've already been using that on the fruit. So by using it in the leaves, it's going to cross-pollinate my colors, and it's going to make the painting look more cohesive. One mark of an amateur painting is seeing every color in the palette being used. When you have that many colors together, you're going to have a discordant painting. You want to mix your colors as much as you can, work with a limited palette, and you'll notice that your work ends up looking a lot more professional. So, and you get to become a better artist and learn your color theory better because you're mixing your colors and making them work. Now for my shadows, I went with kind of like a maroon tone. So I used some of the Quin Red with some Ultramarine blue. It gave me almost like an eggplanty color that worked great in the shadows. And plus, since I was using the that red in the peach itself, it didn't look funny that that shadow was made of that color. I try to avoid using browns and grays and blacks and whatnot because I feel like those colors are pretty dead when you use them in a shadow. When you can use a color that's not quite an opposite, because that can get really muddy. When you use a color that is kind of adjacent to one of your darker colors as a shadow, oftentimes that will work. You might need to desaturate it a bit, like that purpley color we made. If it seems too bright, I can add a little yellow to it and desaturate it a bit, but you get a very natural looking shadow that way. Now I love the way this peach flesh came out here. When I started off, I painted the area with water, the entire slice, and then I went in and put in the yellow and then some browns and reds to kind of just paint that crevice of the peach slice there. Now, when I sketched on the picture, I accidentally had that peach on the lower right. That was supposed to be behind that slice, and I had the lines were overlapping each other, and I thought I just erased the inner line. So I made that one in front, and it worked, and it was fine, but I did have to add some shading. So if you look at the reference photo, you're going to see that it's like, oh, that peach was behind the other peach. So you just make it work, right? You just the more you paint, the more you learn about shadows, the more you learn about color mixing, and then you can be really kind of spontaneous with your painting, and you can change stuff up if you need to. You can add a leaf here. You can, shift something. You can turn something, and you can still end up making it look good. Now, I was showing my water cups there because we are quite a ways into this painting, and my clean water is still clean, and my dirty water is still dirty. When you're watercolor painting, it's a great idea to have 2 water cups, and just make sure you always clean your brush in the same cup, in the dirty water cup, and then your clean water will always stay nice and fresh for your mixes, and your colors will be nice and vibrant. If you find yourself running to the sink every 10 minutes to change your water, just get another bucket and use one bucket for cleaning and the other bucket for mixing your fresh colors. That was one of the first things my art teacher taught me when I was 7 and I started doing watercolor. And yeah, it's true. I've used it my whole life and it works so well. Now that's a scrubber brush right there. It's made by Royal and Langnickel. It's the Menta series, very affordable. I like that because it doesn't tear up my paper, and it's basically a short-haired filbert. And I can go in there and I can like straighten any edges, make things smoother. Like I had a little of that background color just kind of like kind of bleeding in to that nectarine, and I just wanted to smooth that back out, lift up that hard line so I could go in and redefine my edge and make it nice and smooth. That is one of the things I don't like about not wetting my entire paper to begin, like where I worked around the peaches, because then sometimes you do get those hard edges. And sometimes it's nice, but a lot of times it looks almost like you've cut and pasted your elements on, like you've cut the peaches out and you glued them down. And that's not a look I personally like. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, if you like it, then do it. But that's something that I don't like. So I do try to soften those hard edges when they happen. Now you can still kind of make out the picture where it is, even though it's really fuzzy and soft. But those colors are similar. The values are similar. So I knew that even if I had a blurry edge, it wasn't going to be a problem. So doing that wet into wet was fine. If I had to do this again, you know, I think I would do the entire thing wet into wet, and I would just put a very, very pale wash of maybe like a Raw Sienna. I would take that Raw Sienna color from the background and go over the peaches, because I don't think that would really interfere with painting over them, and then I wouldn't have any hard edges. I didn't end up having hard edges at the end, but just as I was painting it, that was kind of... It was kind of in my mind. I was thinking about that, and is that going to be awkward looking as we go along. Now, after this first layer has dried a bit on the peaches, I'm assessing the values. I'm also going in with my watercolor pencil, and I am redrawing some of the details on the picture. And one thing, so this picture is like it's like a faux picture. It's like just a decoration, and the spout is actually welded onto the outside of the bucket. So you couldn't actually pour something from this picture, which I thought was kind of weird, but I didn't want to really deviate that much from the reference photo. But then as I was painting it, I decided I didn't like that, so I do end up scrubbing out the inside of the picture there. You'll see when I get to that. I can't remember how long I decided to go with it before I realized I don't like it. And that, you know, the more you paint, the more you can make choices like that, and the more you can feel confident about executing them. I don't think it's ever a waste to try something, because you're going to learn. Even if it doesn't come out well, it doesn't come out the way you expected, you're still going to learn about why it did or why it didn't. So I say give it a try. Now, one thing I wanted to make sure of when I was painting this picture is that I didn't get rid of the beautiful texture and granulation that was on the bucket. Now, I'll put a still photo of this on Instagram. It might not be right up, because this will go live on Thanksgiving, so you'll have to excuse me. I may be a little behind the 8 ball or a little bit slow, but I will put photos of that up on my blog and on my Instagram. So if you want to take a look, zoom in, see how that texture of that paint looks, it's really something. I just didn't want to lose any of that. I know it's hard to see that texture in a moving video, but it's just really lovely, and I didn't want to overwork that area. I wanted to make sure it looked good. So I'm only putting in shadow where I know I absolutely need it. So I'm putting shadow in behind those peaches because they are kind of, you know, they're blocking the light from hitting the picture. Shading in still lifes can be a little interesting because you've got often multiple light sources, and you've got objects that are going to be bouncing light and blocking light and all of that. So it's nice when you have a good reference photo that you can go from. Now, that reference photo had a really white background, so I did have to kind of make up the colors in the background and the shadows a bit, but it was such an excellent photo that I thought it was still worth definitely going ahead and painting. You can see where I scrubbed out the paint inside the spout up there. I mentioned it ahead of time, but you can see it now how it's really nice and bright. Now, that may not work on the paper you have. If you have a nicely sized paper, you can scrub right back to the paper as long as your paint is not too staining. The Quin Red I used was staining, but the blues and browns and grays that I was using on the picture are very sedimentary. They lift up really easily, so I didn't have any trouble getting that color out. If I wanted to scrub out a Nectarine, though, that would be a little bit trickier if it had a lot of that Quin Red in there, because that's a staining color. But yeah, try it. But if you want a paper that's going to allow you to scrub, you want to have a paper that has a good amount of sizing in it. Like this is the Hahnemühle, the collection paper. It has a great amount of sizing. Also, the Cezanne paper has a good amount of sizing. Those papers are wonderful. I find them to be comparable with Arches. Arches has a gelatin-based sizing. It kind of has a funky smell. And I do like Arches paper, but if you want to avoid having an animal-sized sizing in your paper, you can get the Hahnemühle papers, and they don't use the animal sizing. So, and they also have some eco-friendly papers too, that are more eco-friendly than cotton. Cotton can be a little bit harder to find an eco-friendly version, but they do have a lot of options. Now, they may not have the durability and the scrubbability of a cotton paper that's heavily sized, but you know, there's just so many options out there. But if you do want to be able to scrub it, go for 100% cotton and a brand that has a good amount of sizing, like Hahnemühle, Arches, Let's see, Artistico is pretty good. It doesn't have quite as much sizing as those other two, but you can certainly scrub back on it. I prefer a harder size paper myself. So, and if you know of any really good harder size papers, please leave it in the comments below, because there could be people from other parts of the world watching that could use that resource. I'm familiar with what papers are available near me, but I know that there's a lot more out there. I'm going in with wet paint on dry paper and adding some details, adding some shading, adding some of those more intense colors, and trying to get that indent where the stem is on the nectarines. And I was actually really frustrated with this because I wasn't feeling that I was getting the three-dimensional look that I wanted. Sometimes you just have to step away from your painting and come back, because I did. I actually painted this over the course of 2 days, and I took a few walks, you know. It was kind of like, I think I like how this is going, but something, I don't know if it's done yet. There was a couple times where I'm like, I think it might be done, but I'm not sure. And I honestly just had to kind of walk away, so that I could see it clearly. So that's something that I would recommend if you're looking at your painting and you're just not sure. You don't know if it's done or not. You don't know if something looks awkward. Just taking a step back, putting it on an easel, or maybe even just putting it away for a couple of days, and then putting it on an easel and standing back and looking at it, that can really help you see it clearly, because when you're painting it, it's very distorted. It can be very distorting to look at it, because especially you're sitting down, usually if you're doing watercolor, and your paper's flat, so you've already got a parallax distortion from where you're sitting and the plane of the paper. So putting it up on an easel and stepping back, or putting it on a shelf and stepping back so you can look at it square on, is going to be very helpful. And just giving yourself a little time, because if you're frustrated with something, all you're going to see is that frustration. You're going to see the things that bother you about that painting. I had an art instructor once who was talking about an artist he knew, and he said, and this artist was interviewed, and he said something to the effect of, do you like your work? And he goes, I never liked my work right away, but I like my work a year or two later. And the interviewer asked, why is that? Why do you like your work a year later? And he goes, because I don't remember the battle. So just giving yourself that space where you're not feeling frustrated will make you feel, will let you see it clearly, not even make you feel better about it, but it'll let you see it clearly for what it is, instead of like being frustrated by one little bit that was bothering you. Like that spout, I could have let that spout bother me, but instead I just went in there, I scrubbed it out, and I redid it. And sometimes you need to do that. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to attack something on your painting that isn't working, or that you're not happy with. You may think you're going to ruin it, but let me tell you what, if you're not happy with that part of your painting, now you're never going to be happy with it. If you're frustrated and you know it's not right and it looks awkward, it's never going to look less awkward. I mean, obviously you can put it away and look at it in a week and see if it really looks awkward, or if it was just a figment of your imagination. But if you know something's not right, just jump in there and tackle it, because the chances of you ruining your painting, of course, that's there. But if it's not right and you're not happy with it, then you could already call it ruined, honestly. And even if it doesn't succeed and you don't like the way it turned out after you went in and attacked that part, you are going to learn something. You're going to learn what your paint can do. You're going to learn what your paint can't do. You're going to learn what that brush will do. You're going to learn what that brush won't do. You're going to learn what that paper is capable of. You're going to learn about how much wear and tear and scrubbing that paper can take. So it's worth it. It's worth it to take a risk. If there's anything that you can do in your life, if there's any place in your life that you can feel truly able to take risks, and a place you can truly feel to be brave, it is in your art. If you can't feel brave in your art, then where can you feel brave? It's a safe space for you to create, and nobody has to see it if you don't like. I mean, imagine being a musician. I mean, they play their songs and it's out there and people hear it, and there it is, you know. As an artist, you can kind of hide it away until you're ready to share it with the world. You can protect your fledgling little baby bird artwork until it's ready to be seen. And I think that's really nice, because you can keep tweaking it and keep working at it and keep it for yourself if you want to. Now, I did decide that I wanted to sharpen up some areas and add some details with some colored pencil. One of the reasons I wanted to do this, and I'm using the Color Soft pencils by Derwent, and they were 50% off at Blick yesterday, so maybe they still are. I'll put a link. You can go check it out. But these are a nice soft pencil. They're similar to Prismacolor, a little bit firmer lead than Prismacolor, but way less breakage, and thicker leads too, if you're if you're looking for an alternative there. They're wonderful. They're fairly really, they're semi-opaque, I would say. I can still see the color underneath, but I can also like give an area more body. I can give something some shine. I can just kind of sweeten everything up a little bit. And also I can really direct where I want to have those shadows and details and not cover up any of the beautiful granulation from the super granulating paints I used on the bucket, because that was one thing. I didn't want to do that. And you can also use your watercolor pencils at this late stage and go in and add some texture. You don't have to dissolve it just because it's a watercolor pencil. Now I noticed I didn't have a shadow on that nectarine and back, so I went in with my paints and tried to add it back in, and it got a little muddy, so I had to wipe it out and do the hokey pokey and turn yourself about. And then I went back in with some kind of maroonish color with a little more red added because it looked a little muddy before when it was too purple, and there I was pretty happy with that. And so I'm going in and brightening up some of the color. If you use a pencil on its side like that, you can get a fuzzier texture if you want these to be peaches, or you can use it a little bit more direct on the point of the pencil if you want it smoother and you want them to look like nectarines. So you can really have it however way you want. You can do your own thing. You do you, nectarines, peaches. It's all the same to me. Do whatever you like best. I like them both. They're two of my favorite foods. And I'm just going around and punching up the colors where I want to punch them up, and knowing that I won't really disturb anything else in the picture. It's kind of like using a smaller brush at the end. You're not going to bring too much paint. You're not going to do anything that's really going to wreck anything. Oh, one of the reasons I also wanted to use the color softs here is because they're less shiny than Prismacolor, and I knew it wouldn't give me any glare on the painting, which is nice. There's also a pencil called Pro Color that will give you no glare at all, but they're quite hard, and I wouldn't recommend them unless you're really into color pencils. I think that they could be a little frustrating for beginners or for folks that don't use pencils very much. The color softs are a very easy pencil to use, very forgiving, and a little bit opaque, so they can, stand out on top of the watercolor without adding shine and distracting. Now, I actually thought I might go in, and I haven't, but I thought I might go in with a white paint pen and just kind of do little stipplings on the sliced open peach, like on the pit and on the flesh there to show wetness from like the, freshly sliced peach. But I haven't, and I don't know if I will or not, but that's something I've been thinking about. But for now, I'm going to leave it the way it is with just the color pencil accents. One thing I've noticed about this set of color soft that I have, and I have had a couple different sets of color soft over the years, so I may have mixed up my sets. I don't think I have though, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of grays in this range, so you may need to grab another gray pencil and something else. And you can use a watercolor pencil. You could use any color pencil you want. I actually took a 50 and a 90% cool gray from my Prismacolor stash to add to that, just to add a little shadow where I needed it and sign my name and that sort of thing. So it's totally fine to mix brands. I do it all the time. Works great because you'll find you like some colors in some brands and some in others, and you want that variety. And it's a great way to get the most bang for your buck. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to see the real-time version that is over 2 hours long in 10 bite-sized chunks, you can find it over on Critique Club at lindsayweirich.teachable.com. I'll have a link in the video description. Thank you so much for watching today, and until next time, happy crafting!